I'll call our meeting to order of the Charter Review Committee, Thursday, April 5th, 2018. First item on the agenda is minutes approval of the March 14th, which were sent to you in advance. Any comments or corrections to the minutes?
Can't hear you.
The mic's not working or something.
Is that any better?
You're gonna have to use that.
Is this one better?
Are any of them working?
So what quite often happens, it goes to the televised, but it doesn't necessarily go to the room. Any further discussion on the minutes?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So the public hearing, I'm trying to make sure we can hear in the room.
You might just want to yell.
So I will start reading the, okay, here we go. Thank you. The Charter Review Committee is holding its hearing tonight. The process of tonight's meeting is that we will I'll read the Charter Committee report. We will have a minority report. Any remaining members of the committee are welcome to make comments at that point. We will read whatever written comments we have into the record. At that point, we will open it up to anyone in the audience who want to make written comments. We will then close the public comment period, at which time the committee will deliberate, amend as it decides to do, and vote on the topics addressed. And then when we, assuming that we were able to come to consensus on all those changes, we will then vote to approve the final charter to go to town meeting. So I'll just go a little bit over the process of what the Charter Review Committee did. There's some people who have not heard this information before in the audience world, the television. The Charter provides that at least once in every 10 years, a special committee to consist of 9 members shall be established for the purpose of reviewing this Charter and to make a report with recommendations to the town meeting concerning any proposed amendments which said committee may determine to be necessary or desirable. We have been meeting regularly since forming in August of last year. The members include Board of Selectmen appointees, me, Robert Ebersole, and Jamie Toll, Finance Committee appointees, Terry Birchfield and Mark Erickson, School Committee appointees, Katie Adams and Michael Mackin, Planning Board appointee, Michael Reyes Jeffries, Town Moderator appointees, Nancy Gray and Stephen Archambault. Town boards, committees, and officials were assigned to members of the committee who then reached out to gather their opinions on the current charter. In some cases, the response was no recommended change. In other cases, different wording was proposed. To gather initial input from the public, we utilized online and paper surveys, which did give us some guidance. We voted to establish a supermajority vote requirement of 6 for any proposed change instead of a simple majority of 5 in order to improve the likelihood of acceptance at town meeting. The resulting draft document is our best effort to balance what we heard and how we believe town government should be organized to best meet its obligations to the townspeople of Lunenburg. The committee believes that while the current charter generally works, it's important to regularly review it based on evolving town government and changes to state laws. The proposed draft corrects typographical errors, changed some wording to be clearer without altering the meaning or intent of existing provisions, assuring that one section of the charter is consistent with the other, as well as updating requirements of the open meeting law to comply with state law. There were areas we needed clarification, including town manager supervision of staff serving elected boards, and ensuring we have systems in place so that all town employees are properly supervised and evaluated. We provided for a clear due process system in the town manager removal section. The major changes are as follows. Change the name of the Board of Selectmen to Select Board. While not a substantive change, this recognized that women have and do serve on the board. The Fire department have firefighters, we have police officers, there are flight attendants, there are letter carriers. One person commented on Facebook, as a father of an 11-year-old daughter, I love this idea. Perhaps one of the the biggest change is change the manner of selection of the town clerk from elected to appointed by the town manager, subject to ratification by the select board. The town clerk is currently an elected position to a 3-year term. The current town clerk stated to me and to others that she would not be seeking another term. As the responsibilities and qualifications have grown, many towns have changed to a town clerk position, appointed by the town manager and ratified by the Board of Selectmen. This is the only position that is still an elected position, as other positions such as treasurer and tax collector were changed long ago to appointed positions. The town clerk's duties are administrative and do not rise to the level of policy making like those of elected boards. While we recognize that this position has been answerable directly to the town, an appointment will ensure that someone with appropriate qualifications is hired in the future. We provided that persons appointed to town committees be registered voters, be residents registered to vote in town, to ensure that committee members can participate and vote at town meeting. We are providing for a second town meeting in the fall, the date and time of which to be set by bylaw. This will provide an opportunity to spread out the work of town meeting and make it more likely to have greater participation of town residents. As a result of some initial feedback, I will be proposing that this be called the annual special town meeting instead of a second annual town meeting, to eliminate some controversy, some conflicts with state law. Providing that the conduct of town meeting be governed by town meeting time. We have that in the bylaws, but we want to make sure that it's part of the charter. To clarify and confirm the appointment powers of the select board and the town manager, provide for appointment of various town department heads to be appointed by the town manager, subject to the ratification of the select board. Currently, the town treasurer and tax collector are recommended by the town manager, but appointed by the Board of Selectmen. The town accountant, council and aging director, and animal control are appointed directly by the Board of Selectmen. The director of municipal finance would be appointed through this process. This is created now due to the reorganization that the previous town manager implemented. Director of facilities, we had quite a bit of discussion as a result of dealing with town buildings that were not properly maintained due to funding or lack of supervision, that it was important to call out the responsibility under the board of the town manager, and we called out that there needed to be a director of facilities, not necessarily a separate position, because that duty is currently done by the DPW director. The school committee, there is no substantive change there. We did change the word elect the superintendent, and we changed it to select the superintendent. Cemetery Commission, we added sole to the responsibility to make regulations, and adding language to the cemetery, park, and sewer to clarify language regarding day-to-day operations versus policy. The library, we changed to provide a selection of employees the same as other town departments per town labor council's recommendation. We do expect to make typographical corrections and delete reference to the DPW regarding maintenance, as that is happening now. The park department clarifying day-to-day operations as opposed to policy. Planning board adding language clarifying that the town manager supervises the planning director, and that the town manager, through the reorganization function, has the ability, has appointed that position to be the land use director, but the planning board doesn't supervise the land use functions, only the planning director, so that's why that was separated out. Sewer, clarify day-to-day operations. The Sewer Commission has proposed language further clarifying the policy making relating policy, budget, and regulations. We updated the town manager screening committee by adding a member of the public not on any committee or elected position, so that there would be additional public involvement in that. Adjusting appointments, as I described under the selectmen. Public facilities, adding the responsibility for maintenance and repairs, subject to written policies for all town buildings. Supervising contracts with employees is the wording now. We added the words bargaining units. And as I stated before, removal and suspension, additional due process. We eliminated the division of procurement because it's not needed because the town manager serves that function. Under budget, we eliminated the requirement to publish the summary of the budget in the newspaper, and we moved it to the website. Under multiple member bodies, we updated language regarding open meeting law. We added a section for enforcement of charter and bylaws, which provides that the town manager is responsible to give notice to the person violating the charter or the bylaws that it must be complied with. We did add a section on continuation of government, but we've discovered that that was a duplicate of a section that was already there, so that will probably be deleted. We made certain other grammatical and phrasing changes that do not alter the meaning or intent of the provisions. There were several changes that we considered but voted not to adopt, including representative town meeting. We're staying with open town meeting in this draft. Minimum vote requirements for write-in requirements. We did not adopt term limits for elected officials, and we did not we considered but did not vote for ranked choice voting. So those are the major areas of the changes within this draft. We will now hear from Katie Adams for the minority report.
All right, the minority report for the Lunenburg Charter Review 2018. It was established that Lunenburg's charter would be reviewed by a 9-member appointed committee every 10 years. I think it is important to first identify what we were selected to do, which is to review the charter. It is entirely possible to review the document and leave it unchanged. Any change to the charter should be clearly understood as to why it's being done and what the intent of any proposed change is. Changes should be carefully evaluated for unintended consequences. A healthy government requires input and involvement from citizens and should always be cautious to provide a balance of power. As the lone dissenter of the draft changes to our charter, I will provide my input on the proposed changes that I do not support. Most notably, I support having an elected town clerk. Under the proposed changes, our town manager would appoint the town clerk. We have eliminated other elected positions in the past, and without elected positions, citizens of Lunenburg may lose their voice. Our town will be run more like a business and less like a government. In a healthy government, citizens are intended to be a part of the process. Language has been added to the charter in sections that describing boards and commissions' powers and duties. These changes may interfere with elected board members and commissioners' ability to act on behalf of their position. I would default to leaving the language as it appears in the current charter unless the change's intent is more specifically explained. A new position called the Director of Facilities has been added to the charter. I do not recall voting to add this position, and I'm unsure why it is in our draft charter. Through changes in this charter, we are giving our town manager more control, especially by allowing him or her to appoint a town clerk. Although the town manager is hired to run the town, the manager is still an employee and not an elected official. I think it is absolutely imperative that any opportunity for citizen involvement is never removed. Outcomes in government are usually not improved when input from the community is decreased. Thank you.
Thank you. I will read written comments into the draft, on the draft charter into the record. There are some that we have that are a series of emails, so I'm going to summarize some of that. And I know we have, first one is relating to the library. We have representatives from the library who I expect to speak tonight.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, thank you. We were supposed to follow comments by remaining committee members. Go this way, thank you.
Okay. Basically, the only thing that I wanted to comment on was to make clear why I took positions that I took on some of the changes or potential changes. And I know that one of the concerns that a lot of people had was, you know, like the notice of this meeting coming after or so late in the process, to me was, I think I voted to put everything in the charter knowing that it was possible that it would be voted down, and that's okay. And then basically the worst that'll happen is We'll be back in the fall, but we'll have more information. So just to be clear, I don't think anybody will take any umbrage with, like anything that people might have to say. Certainly, one of the first things that we did talk about was the whole notion of representative town meeting, and I want to make clear that my view of having 2 town meetings was we felt, well, I'm not the only one on the committee who felt strongly that we wanted to see, we didn't want to go to representative town meeting without aggressively going after increasing participation in open town meeting. We thought that it was too important to keep that form of government. And if it meant trying to figure out how to shorten the meetings by having a known meeting in the spring and a known meeting in the fall so people could plan and follow the proper procedures to bring items up without having to count on the potential of a special town meeting where people had maybe 4 weeks to get their act together to come and present, we thought that that would be an issue. The other part of that discussion was that we wanted to have, some of us wanted to have, on the first town meeting, a time certain that it would end. And so basically, if town meeting started at 8:30 and ended at 12 o'clock, everybody could plan on 12 o'clock. There's no more warrant articles discussed. We just automatically moved the rest of the meeting to Monday night. So that basically, again, people could plan for what was going on, hopefully increasing participation in town meeting. And part of that was that we do look at, unless there's something particularly controversial on the agenda, sometimes it's hard to get 50 people at the meeting. And I would also speak to, when I first started here in Lunenburg and went to town meeting, I have to say I had never participated in a town government. I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was very interesting that the whole nature of the meeting changed after lunch with the number of people who went home. And the first meeting I was here for was the vote to renovate Town Hall and the vote to renovate Ritter, and the vote to renovate Ritter passed in the morning. The vote to renovate Town Hall failed in the afternoon, and it had to do with the number of people who left the meeting. So to me, it's just important to finish with who you start with, so that was part of the reason why I really wanted to go to the town meeting. The town clerk appointment, basically the reason why I supported this move was that, to me, it looks like a full-time position. That's what it looks like to me. And if I'm working in a full-time position, I don't understand why I have to run for it every 3 years if I'm doing a good job. And I don't think why I'm not supported by, or don't necessarily have a support mechanism within the organization of the town government. So that's basically, again, I don't come from town government. I didn't grow up with town government. I grew up in the Navy. And then basically a city. So it was, again, that's basically where my position was on that. And it's some of the other changes, like the select board, selectmen, if there's strong feeling one way or the other, fine. And in terms of the language changes, again, I'm here to also learn that if there was an unintended consequence, what that was. Again, that was basically on the big ones. That was my thinking on those things. And I just really did want to make clear that it had a lot to do with, we want more participation from the town, and we just saw this as a way to get it without just going straight to representative town meeting. So thank you.
Steve, do you want to make any comment?
No comment.
Thanks, Steve.
Not at this time.
Okay. Nancy?
Aye.
Mike? Jamie? No? Michael?
Yes. Okay. I'm Michael Ray Jeffries. I was appointed to this committee by the planning board, of which I'm a member. It's been a good working with other volunteers in town to sort through and evaluate our charter. A cornerstone of our republic is having a government for us and by us. And I believe that the vast majority of my fellow committee members genuinely sought consensus throughout these meetings and discussions to ensure that we've structured an efficient government that is accountable to and reflective of the good residents of this town. I think the general approach here was conservative. If it's not broke, don't fix it. We recognized first that in the absence of a swell of residents urging for change, we would focus instead on evaluating whether or not what is already written is working. As a member and appointee of the planning board and liaison for the building departments, the concerns raised on their behalf dealt with clarifying the relationship between town employees and elected officials to be more similar in wording to the relationship between the Board of Selectmen and town manager. I'm satisfied with several of these changes. The highlights are: one, it's clear that the planning board is a policy-focused elected body whose members can better focus on the needs of our community. There's now a much clearer mechanism to hold employees accountable. Two, the historical term selectmen for nearly 200 years referred to the male leaders of New England towns. Today, it can refer to both men and women. Adjusting the name of the body to select board, as many New England towns have done over the last 60 years, more clearly says to current and future young men and women that if they too aspire to be leaders of our community, that they can be select men or select women, and both titles are held in the same esteem. Three, adding a second scheduled town meeting in the fall reflects that our town is growing and gives boards and residents 2 routine opportunities each year to meet in legislative session. And four, we permit the town manager to create a position for a facility manager. For the most part, matters that don't involve public safety or the schools involve the DPW. And we've been asking for a lot from one department head who works with more elected officials than he has employees. As a property manager, I believe that the proactive management of all these town buildings is, in and of itself, a full-time job. We have to get out of this reactive posture when it comes to buildings, which are our biggest expenses. And we need professional facility management separated from the duties of the DPW director. While these are 4 areas that this charter makes real progress on, I believe quite strongly that the town clerk should remain an elected role. It is so important to have an elected non-ministerial employee who answers directly to the people. We need someone who's not sipping the Kool-Aid and isn't under threat of being fired to alert us to potential abuses. Despite my disagreement with this change, I believe that the changes we've presented are the best product that could have come out of this committee within this time frame. But this is not a finished product. This is a committee product. We need someone who's not, tonight's public hearing matters far more than every meeting we've had so far. So I'm ready to listen, to deliberate, and to vote. I'm thankful for all the comments that were provided prior to this meeting. I expect that not all elected boards will want the language that this body added, and I hope we change it, if requested. I hope we reevaluate adjusting the town clerk's position. I hope we add in language similar to what's in Mass General Law that allows a minimum voting threshold when there are no candidates on the ballot for an open position. And I hope we can give and take in a healthy enough way that will allow us to leave here with consensus on a charter that is passable and reflective of the good intentions of us all.
Thank you. Any other comments from anyone? Okay. So now, comments that were submitted as to before this meeting. The library met, and as I mentioned, they discovered some typographical corrections, which I will bring up during our discussion. The most important part that they raised is that the paragraph states that the town manager shall, with the input of the library director, be responsible for hiring and removal of all library employees except the library director. I think that's the major concern that they had. Currently, it's the other way around, that the library director does the hiring consistent with town policies. This one was recommended by Town Labor Council in order to be consistent. So that was that concern there. Carl Luck submitted communication regarding the language that Michael just talked about, providing for no person who is a write-in candidate for election to town office, if no candidate's name is printed on the ballot, therefore be deemed to be elected unless he or she receives a number of votes at least equal to the number of signatures which would be required by law to place the name on the ballot at such election as a candidate aforesaid. He expects to speak, but provide in advance. This only comes into play when there are no names on the ballot for an elected position. There would be no minimum number of write-in votes required to be elected if there is a printed nominee. It does not at all affect the number of votes required of the printed nominee. It would encourage residents interested in serving to either take out papers or run an open write-in campaign so voters would be aware of the candidate's intentions Voters would be able to make an informed vote for or against the candidate. If a write-in candidate cannot manage to receive the required number of votes, it is felt that the better, more open process would be for the position to be filled by the appointment process until the next town election. This would allow proper vetting and give the public a voice they may not have had in an unadvertised write-in strategy. Regarding the committee's concern that this issue could derail approval of the charter, I would submit that everyone I know already thinks there's a minimum number of votes required. After hearing that someone got voted into a position with 3 votes at the last election, 3 of the members of that board were surprised. 2 of those members went to legal, believing the declaration of election was an error, only to find out a single vote was enough to be elected. At that time, council indicated charter would be the right place to add a requirement similar to Mass General Laws, Chapter 53, Section 40, as other towns have done. To address your important question of why this matters, I submit the following what-if scenario to consider. As it stands today, if there's an elected position that does not have any nominees on the ballot, a person who has a personal agenda could get elected for up to a 5-year term with only a couple of votes. This could happen without anyone being aware until it's too late. Even if this person was not able to realize his/her personal objectives, he/she could become a disruptive force, resulting in poor results, progress on the board, drive other members from the board, and/or deter others from volunteering. With this proposal, it would be difficult for someone to get the required number of votes, which currently would be 42 and stay completely beneath the radar. Finally, will this new requirement deter any sincere volunteers? I cannot see how. In such a situation, it's quite easy to get nominated at a caucus. If it is too late, papers can be pulled. In the worst case, a person can run a write-in campaign. I would hope that a good candidate would be able to get at least 42 people to the polls. Compared to the work that will be required on any of our boards, this does not seem too much of an effort to gain the opportunity to serve. I certainly hope you'll consider this request and approve recommending this to the town. The Board of Sewer Commissioners met on Tuesday and voted to, they rearranged some of the language, but I'll read the language that basically is completely new or revised. The Sewer Commission shall be responsible for the formulation and promulgation of policy directives and guidelines to be followed by all town agencies serving sanitary sewers, to develop and promulgate policy guidelines to design, coordinate the operation of all sanitary sewers, provided, however, that nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize any member of the commissioners, nor a majority of such members, to become involved in the day-to-day administration of any town agency. The Board of Sewer Commissioners shall have the sole responsibility to create regulations, policies, budget governing the superintendence and management of all sanitary sewers in Lunenburg. All other sections remain the same. Received a recommendation from the sewer business manager, Barb Lefebvre. She had suggested that we add language after day-to-day to be involved in the day-to-day administration and, I'll read out the full sentence. Provided, however, that nothing in this sentence is to authorize any member of the commissioners nor a majority of such members to become involved in the day-to-day administration and operation of the town department within the scope of their purview. The town clerk sent noticed comment today. Dear committee members, the report indicates that I have publicly announced my retirement, from my perspective, that is not true. However, your chair recalls a conversation in which I made that announcement to him. Not recalling this conversation, I asked that he remove that part of the report, believing that if it was to be announced, it was my place to do. Secondly, I would like to express views on the elected versus appointed town clerk. 1, no to appointed. 2, public servant. This is what most clerks pride themselves on, none more than I. Serving the public outside the regular office hours when a resident is unable to get to town hall for what is needed from the clerk's office. 2015 shows 86 Massachusetts town clerks appointed and 226 elected. Town clerk is a position that everyone is familiar with. Most calls come to the clerk leading off with, not sure if I have the right department, but I know that you can direct me. It is still the only position an elected employee whose salary is set by town meeting and is accountable to everyone in the community and not just the Board of Selectmen or the town manager. Somewhat offended by, quote, an appointment will ensure that someone with appropriate qualification is hired, end quote. Really? Truly believe that the office qualifies the candidate, especially town clerk. I trust hundreds/thousands of voters to choose from their own more than I would trust a handful of officials choosing what they consider appropriate. And finally, the elected town clerk has been the keeper of various records for our town for almost 300 years. This right and responsibility should stay with all voters. If it is a popularity contest, I prefer more, not fewer judges. And those were the written comments.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
there is one additional. I got an email from Karen Menard of the Parks Commission that I'd like to read into the record. Hi, Mark. Thank you for forwarding the charter draft last week. I'm writing today as an individual commissioner and resident. Since I am unable to attend this evening's meeting due to a training class, I am asking that you share this. I'm concerned with the added wording at the end of the Park Commission section, as it appears to limit the Park Commissioner's ability to complete the tasks they were elected to do. There is no definition of what constitutes day-to-day administration, nor definition of broad policy, creating ambiguity of activities that fall between these two. I agree that the true day-to-day operations should be conducted by town employees. However, I believe the ambiguity I pointed out above should fall within the powers and duties of elected officials. This ensures that the citizens are given a voice in the town. At this time, I feel that the current charter wording of the day-to-day care and maintenance falling under the supervision of the town manager or her delegate is more than adequate to ensure that park commissioners won't be able to overstep. Finally, I believe all powers granted to the Park Commission under MGL should be granted to Lunenburg Park Commission. Thank you for your time. Karen Menard.
Thank you. Any other public comments that anyone else received? I'll read the comments from Town Council, which we received today. He did his review. I've done my review with the charter. My comments are now added. He's got a version. We will be discussing them through the process. Nothing really substantive changes because we've been sending him information when we had a major question for him to review. Aware that the attention of town meeting and ultimately the legislature will be on the modification made since the prior approved charter, a consummate review on the changes that are now proposed. That being said, he did make a few comments on other recommendations concerning the provision of the charter that we hadn't discussed. Somewhat echoing what Karen said, I made part of the document included the memorandum received from the sewer business manager and your subsequent email welcoming feedback on the issues she raises. He states, I am quite aware of the challenges already had differentiating between the policy-making authority of certain boards and commissions and the powers and duties of the town manager to address day-to-day. Among the first questions received as town council was, what does day-to-day mean? Exactly. It is, of course, not explicitly defined and consequently subject to reasonable interpretation. Per my comment, my best recommendation is that as much clarity as possible be added to better define the roles of board, commission, and town manager, unless the ambiguity is intentional. Not defining these roles with too much specificity is less constraining on the one hand, but it can also cause for confusion and conflict on the other. You also inquired about process. Specifically, your questions were, and the answers are as follows. What is the vote requirement for approval at town meeting? A majority or 2/3 vote. And where is that stated in general laws if we're not following Chapter 43B? 43B is the charter process by which the town votes to establish a charter commission and elects those members, which is what we did the first time we adopted. The first time we didn't adopt it, and then the next time we did adopt it. Only a simple majority vote is required, not because it's specifically stated anywhere, but because no greater quantum of vote is specified. A special act charter, which is what we're doing here, is not a 43B charter as authorized by the Home Rule Amendment. The general court shall have the power to act in relation to cities and towns, but only by general laws which apply alike to all cities and to all towns and all cities and towns, or to a class of fewer not than two, and in bold, by special laws enacted on petition filed or approved by voters of the city or town or other legislative body in the town meeting of a town with respect to a law relating to that city. The second question I asked the town council, at the last charter revision vote, it was a vote up or down, and town meeting could not amend any provisions within the charter. Do you know where that requirement comes from? His answer in simple words was, I do not. And we've done considerable searching for it, as you are not the first to tell me that previously amendments couldn't be proposed at town meeting. But the home rule petition process for charter adoption and amendment is governed only by the enabling legislation, i.e. Section 8 of the Home Rule Amendment quoted above, and the terms of the charter itself. As to the former, Mass Department of Revenue explains that Section 8 process is not prescribed with any particulars at all. It does not give detailed instructions regarding the preparation of a home rule petition. A mayor or a board of selectmen may appoint a study committee, or such committees may be created by city council or vote of town meeting. Such actions may set a timeline for such committees' report back, but there's no state requirement for specific timeline. There is also no requirement for printing and distribution of any proposal. There are no public hearing requirements per se, although some study committees do provide a public forum for discussion of its recommendations, and town meetings or city council meetings where such changes would be considered are public meetings. In recent years, however, some study committees have made use of city-town website to publicize their recommendations. After completing its work, the committee submits its recommendation to the local legislative body, which must decide whether to approve a home rule petition. If the petition is passed by the legislative body, town meeting, it is then treated as a piece of proposed legislation, i.e. is filed with the House or Senate clerk, assigned to a legislative committee, passed by the House and Senate. It can be changed by the House and Senate, signed by the governor, returned to the city and the town. In most instances where a significant change is proposed, the legislation will be subject to ratification by the municipality's voters prior to taking effect. Hope I've answered your questions. So one of the things that I wanted to do before we start the public comment process is just have us all understand the rules. I don't think it changes our role here. I think it's our role to come up with the best charter that we're going to recommend to town meeting. What has changed? Town meeting approves or disapproves by majority vote. Town meeting can make amendments. It's a whole different world. But I don't think it's a bad world. It allows for us to give our opinion. We're going to have lots of opinions tonight in addition to the written comments, and we welcome them all. We will then close the hearing and have deliberation. We'll have our own opinions. I expect that the charter is going to change. How much substantially from what we've done the last time, I don't know. I wouldn't project that at this point. And then we will be voting to approve the final charter and then go to town meeting. And we will have additional, we'll be talking at the end about what other outreach we want to do to carry the message forward and give other people opportunity to have the discussion. So, I will now open this to public comment. I would ask anybody who wants to come here, please identify yourself and your name, your address. I'm going to ask that you come up here once, make all your comments, and then let other people talk. And at the end, after everybody's had an opportunity to talk, if you heard something that you would like to say something else at the end, you're welcome to come back. We want to just make sure everybody has an opportunity to make comments. If you want to submit written comments, you're welcome to do tonight. Since we now are going to have the opportunity of town meeting making amendments, you're welcome to submit additional written opportunity. We will still have continuing discussions, because the ideal situation would be that we all come up together and have a charter that we all can support, or that the majority of the town can support. And whether you support it or not, we want to have whatever provisions are in there that you may or may not support be written the best way, so that if it does get adopted, it's a good charter. I will now open the public hearing. And the clerk has asked you to spell your last name after you've given it, so we get it for the minutes.
Richard Mayu, 88 Laurel Lane, Lunenburg. M-A-I, 2 L's, O-U-X. Chair of the Library Board. First of all, thank you for all the work, because I think anybody who's been on any board for any amount of time, never mind an extra board, on top of the board that you serve on, that is commendable. As was mentioned, one of the sort of leftovers from the original library section had to do with responsibility for the ordinary maintenance of the library buildings. Property may be transferred to a central municipal maintenance department by town meeting vote. And that was something I think that was just sort of, we had taken it off when we did our thing, and you guys sort of left it on, but it's irrelevant because it doesn't happen that way. Okay, as for the Lunenburg Library portion, you adopted what we suggested almost in its entirety. And one of the things that was sort of interesting to us as the library board is when we looked at the existing provisions as related to the library, we said, oh, really? That's how it's supposed to be done, because it didn't reflect. I mean, I've been on the board 6+ years, and I served many years ago, and some of that language had never been, to the best of my knowledge, followed. So this was a perfect opportunity to really encode what, in fact, operates, how we operate in the charter. So we took that and we wrote a fairly substantial revision and submitted that to you. And as I said, as I looked at what the proposed charter and what we submitted, you took it, almost everything. You inserted, though, the town manager into the hiring process for library employees, different from what is now or from what I know has ever been. The board, unfortunately, was not aware that we consider that a major change. We weren't aware that that change was going to be in the offing. We could have been looking at your agendas, but it might have been nice if we had just a heads up that was going to come up for discussion, and maybe we could have shown up at that meeting. But that, in any case, the library is not like the other departments. If anything, we are more like the school department, although a bit smaller, where the elected school board hires the superintendent, and the superintendent hires the employees. Unlike the other departments, the town manager does not hire the library's department head, also known as the director. She is hired by and supervised by the elected board of trustees. Part of her duties is to hire and train staff. In regards to the other town departments, the town manager hires the department head with your approval, the select board's approval, and the department head then, I guess, gives her the duty to hire the people who will work for that department head. So there's sort of a direct line of authority that comes down. The Lunenburg Public Library doesn't work that way. In fact, I could find no other libraries where anyone other than the director did the hiring. Groton oversees and monitors staffing levels, assigns personnel, develops work schedules, maintains all personnel management functions, including hiring, reviews, discipline, firing, etc. Athol recruits, selects, promotes, and terminates all other library personnel. Littleton, responsible for staff management, delegates authority where appropriate, hires, trains, motivates, supervises. Westford recruits, selects, evaluates, promotes, terminates departmental personnel. Administers personnel policies in accordance with the Town of Westford personnel policies, procedures, pertinent bargaining unit contractual agreements. Bolton hires, trains, supervises, and disciplines staff, including developing work schedules, maintains personnel records. County of Natrona, Wyoming hires, trains, supervises, and monitors the performance. State of Iowa, staff, employ a competent and qualified librarian, includes recruiting, hiring, and annually evaluating the director based upon, etc. And that was, just a quick sort of survey. So, I would, and I think I speak for the board of library trustees, ask that the Charter Commission strongly consider reinstating the language crafted by the board of the Lunenburg Public Library relating to the director's hiring of library staff. And we just think that it's worked well. It is the way that most libraries work. And we would like to see that reinstated. The language, all of the other things as far as the relationship with the town, the employees, once they're hired, are governed by the salary and administration plan and all the other policies. And in fact, even now, the resumes, et cetera, come in through Town Hall to the library for open positions. But we'd like to suggest strongly that that go back to the way that it was.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next.
Try to give other people a chance. Carl Luck, 50 Sunset Lane. First, I'd like to address the, which, thank you for reading, so I don't have to read it. I don't think I could. I know that this commission has already addressed a proposal along those lines. However, when it was initially proposed, it was very different wording, and it was much more complicated and affected a lot of other things. That wasn't the intent at the time, but if you agreed, it would have been fine, but you didn't. The intent is what was presented here in the language, and it is based word for word with just removing, substituting, our town for the state, based on the state general law, Mass General Law. So, which I have in your package, but it is the wording of the state Mass General Law. It is what the town council recommended and said that many other communities have done to kind of plug this hole that we have, where a single vote. Again, only when there is nobody named on the ballot. That's the only time this applies. And it's the only time you could get elected with one vote. So I hope you take that very seriously and implement that. As I said, of all the people I've asked, everybody thinks there already is such a law, that you need a certain number of votes. There's a lot of different opinions as to how many that is, but most people think that already exists. So I don't think it would be a shocker to our voters to put that in. The number is just, again, from the state law. If the 42 seems overwhelming, maybe you can talk about that. I'm not sure. I don't hang my hat on that, but we're trying to keep it as close to the state law as possible. So that's on that one. Unless there are any other questions, or you're not convinced yet, we could go on. The second thing I'd like to comment on. The Sewer Commission unanimously voted on what you have and read, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that. Clearly, we only addressed the Sewer Commission changes to the charter. That exact same language that we have now gone in and proposed additional language to is in several other commissions, and I think Mr. Erickson read one of those comments, and that language of broad policy guidelines, we deleted because it's just so obscure. Broad, to begin with, makes it fuzzy, but a policy guideline, I don't even know what that is. And that's in every other commission, so I would hope that you would revisit that language as well. The reason that we had such a modification was because what you put in the commissions, in 3 or 4 commissions language, was only a piece of what was in the Board of Selectmen, and it was out of context. So basically, we took the entire paragraph that related to what you pulled in and put it in because it was significant. It gives it very different meaning. So I would just suggest you look at the other boards. On the day-to-day issue, that's been an issue for a long time. One of the first council open what do they call them? Office hours. The Sewer Commission has been wrestling with that, and council's response was, because we wanted to get what is day to day. His response was, you can try to define it. He would not try to define it. His comment was, it cannot be taken out of context. You have to define it in terms of the entire document. So the effort to try to define what day-to-day as a standalone thing is, he spoke very strongly against that. It has to be in context. So I don't know if I would recommend delving into trying to define day-to-day. I think most of us know what it is, quite frankly. The other point I'd like to make is the two town meetings I absolutely support. I support it not just based on concept, but based on some discussions and financial issues that come up. Financially, it's very good to have that second meeting so that transfers can be made once the town is, once the prior year has been closed out, so we know what to transfer. The sewer commission has gotten messy, books because you transfer what you know at a certain point before the end of the year, and then some more stuff comes in, and it's very difficult. So I strongly support having two, known certain town meetings. The select board, I absolutely do not support. I think it's just a feel-good. It doesn't really accomplish anything. It doesn't change anything. Is my understanding. We have them both here, so they can contradict me. That I don't think our female selectmen take any offense or have any problem with that. I think it's much to do about nothing and just a feel-good thing, and I don't see why you go changing everything just to feel good. One of the things that I've looked for, looking at all the commissions and things, and I couldn't find in the charter, and I couldn't find in the bylaw, and maybe someone will point me to it, but if it isn't in the bylaw, I would suggest that that your commission now or in a reset would look at road commissioners. I can't find, I keep hearing the term road commissioners, but I can't find anywhere that creates such a thing. And it should be clear. It's either clear or it's the selectmen. It shouldn't be, selectmen acting as something that isn't defined. So I would add that to the list. I've looked at most of the tapes of this commission, and you've been doing a lot of hard work, a lot of discussion. You had a really good plan back in the end of December. You established a really good timeline of tying things down. It was perfect. It gave the community, everyone, plenty of time to be involved in the process. As you can see, until you got most of your reaction, I'm sure, and once your draft came out. In your timeline, this meeting should have been in February 21st. And had you done that, we would have then had this meeting, and you would have had several months to then go back to work, which I quite frankly think is what this commission needs to consider, because you're going to get a lot of input tonight. There's commissions that maybe haven't even come to grips with some of the language that you put in that you should hear about and should participate in this. So I would strongly request or suggest that after getting all this good input, you've got a really great starting point for now really rolling up your sleeves and working with people to get something done for the fall town meeting. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is David W. Rogers, R-O-D-G-E-R-S. I live at 82 Highland Street, Lunenburg. First off, I do not support a name change for the Board of Selectmen. On section 2-3 committees, it says in the second sentence, each such committee, when acting within the scope of its authority, shall have the right to examine the pertinent records of any town agency and to consult at reasonable times with any town officer, employee, or agent. I thought we had that as a right under the Freedom of Information Act. I was unaware that that could not come as a standard right. Special town meetings require 200 or more voter petitions, where with a special town meeting for articles, it requires 100. It seems to me that we should make it easier for the public to convey their thoughts to the people, and this certainly escalates that to a new level. While we're talking about that, there has been some discussion about voter petitions, and some members of elected boards don't think that that's a very good idea, and we should go always through the various stages. And I submit that this is the purest form of democracy, and that if people, for whatever reason, want to initiate a petition that they feel strongly about, they should have the ability to do that. I say that because recently we had a situation with the Wallace Park playground, and it was not supported by the Parks Department, the Finance Committee, or the Board of Selectmen. And yet, one individual, Chris Letarte, felt strongly about this thing, and he put together a group of people, and we got the petition signs, went to town meeting, and it was passed unanimously. So that's a clear indication of, notwithstanding what some people in the town feel, elected officials, appointed officials, the option for townspeople to come forth and produce a petition that they feel strongly about should be encouraged, not looked or frowned upon. Page 6 of 3.1, general provisions. Page 6, number 6. Propositions on ballot. A cross mark is required, and it should read, I think, it should be any mark that indicates the voter selection. Maybe I'm looking for into this and the specificity of this, but I would not ever want somebody's vote to be uncounted because for whatever reason they happen to make a check or they marked inside the boundaries of the box or whatever. And I think that the X is too restrictive. Powers and duties of the selectmen, section 3.2. The selectmen shall serve as the chief policy-making agency of the town. And elsewhere in the charter, it says that the various committees, specifically the Park Department and the Cemetery Department, have the right to establish policies as it pertains to the operation of their group. Now, my question is, notwithstanding that, and no pun intended, does the Board of Selectmen trump the two committees? If the intent is that they do, then why do you have the committees? And I would hope that the committees would have the ability to discuss this and come up with rules and regulations and policies that make sense for them and voted on, and that should be the guidelines that we have for the operation of those committees. Page 7, 3.2. Selectmen appointments. The appointed town collector, tax collector, town clerk shall be appointed. I feel strongly that this should be up to the voters of the town of Lunenburg. And the analogy I would use is this. The opinions and the rights of, let's say, 1,000 people that come and vote at a town election, I would trust more than the same thing for 5 people, just because of the numbers of people. And to just say 5 people can appoint someone to this important position, I don't think is right. I think that we should continue on having that as an elected situation. In the document itself, there was reference to the town director of facilities, and that was referenced before. I don't think that the charter is responsible for directing new hires and that sort of thing. I mean, you can make a reference to it, I guess, but I think that's something that should be brought through the channels and not said by this committee that, we think that we need a director of facilities. I think it needs more study and more information. The Board of Assessors, Section 3.4. The Board of Assessors should select, in my opinion, the principal assessor, not the town manager. The town manager should not be involved as the assessors are elected. Now, a general statement that I'd like to give is that I really think that the role of the town manager has really been extended and expanded upon to the extent that, I mean, if you look at it, I believe that there are 8 people that could be construed to run this town. The 5 Board of Assessors, the 5 members of the Board of Selectmen, the town manager, the superintendent of schools, and the person that the town manager delegates all the things that he or she is able to delegate. And I think that's wrong. I think if you are elected as a member of a committee by the people, your actions, your decisions should not be preempted by someone who is a town employee as the Board of Selectmen appoints the town manager. That's how I feel. Section 3.5, Cemetery Commission. First and foremost, I want to make sure that we give a shout out to the superintendent of the cemetery. I think he does a wonderful job, and he's just a fantastic employee, as there are others in the same category within this town, and we're fortunate to have that level of commitment. The cemetery rules and regulations say that the elected commissioners have the right for the chairman of the elected commissioners to set policy in conjunction with the commissioners, and they can essentially guide the process through. But I'm told that has been changed by the town manager. And the Cemetery Commission has rules and regulations that I have a copy of. It's was copied from their webpage, or I always get that confused, but it was in the computer. And it says, the opening and closing of the cemeteries for burials and niche wall services, as well as for vehicular traffic, will be determined by the seasonal weather conditions that are in existence at the time and at the discretion of the Cemetery Commission chairman. It provides further on that the commission can talk about various things and come up with an idea and a policy, so-called, and that's what their job is. So why does it make sense to have the town manager come in and say, okay, we're going to have this delegated to somebody who, in my opinion, is overworked, and it doesn't make any sense to me. But the current operation is such, when the cemetery commissioners are elected. The people elect them, so let them do the job. I said my piece about, the Board of Sewer Commissioners. You know, that's an important group. And it says in the section that they have the right to come up with rules and regulations and policies and stuff, but yet the town manager is responsible for the day-to-day operation, and she can delegate that to somebody. So essentially, you're elected to do something, but you can't do it because somebody else who's not elected is going to manage this and delegate it to another town employee. To me, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Because if cooperation can prevail, I'm sure a lot can get done, and we won't need all of this interaction by the town manager. In the charter revision, there is a residency requirement, okay? It says that people shall move to the town, and here it is. Section C on page 13. Okay. Town treasurer, tax collector, town accountant, director of municipal finance, town clerk, who, if not currently, shall be a resident of the town and a registered voter within 6 months of appointment. You sure you want to do that? I think that the director, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, the director of municipal finance doesn't live in Lunenburg. So why would you put a residency requirement on someone so important that does such a great job and force them to live in the town? Am I reading this right?
No.
Okay, good. Correct me.
So that only relates to the town clerk.
Why?
If the town clerk were appointed, the town clerk runs elections and has to be an elected. So that clause about who, if not currently, shall be resident town, a registered voter, only if it's an appointed town clerk.
Doesn't say that.
It
doesn't say, it says the town clerk.
Town clerk.
Yeah, you're assuming that it's going to pass and it's going to be an appointment.
No, I agree. I'm not going to debate the benefits. I'm just saying grammatically, the who refers to the noun just before it, and that's the clerk.
Okay, and I refer to the fact that you are assuming that the town clerk is going to be appointed.
In this proposal,
Right.
That's correct.
And, you know, if it's not, then you got to change that.
You're right.
Okay. Let's see here. I'm really quick here to end. Overall, I think you've got the sense of what I'm trying to convey here. I think we're getting further and further removed from the people that we're all supposed to be working for, and that's the taxpayer. And I think that we need to reassess some situations. And some decent suggestions have come up with regard to the town meeting. I guess it could also be argued that, you know, extending this stuff is like having a counter space in a kitchen. The more you have, the more you use, the more it's cluttered. So we used to get this stuff done in one day, and then it expanded. So I'm willing to try it, you know, as a voter, but I think we need to tighten this thing up. And I think really we have to look at what the town manager is doing as it pertains to all the things that I've said. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
How you doing? Matt Woodward, 64 Arbor Street. That's Woodward, W-O-O-D, W-A-R-D.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Woodward, W-O-O-D, W-A-R-D.
Thank you.
Matthew, or Woody, as many people
Thank
know me
you.
as. Real quick, appreciate all the time you guys put into that. Time is very valuable. Could be real quick. Yeah, just there's three things I want to touch on. The Board of Selectmen to Select Board. I believe it's fine the way it is. It's been working for years. I agree with Mr. Luck. It's kind of just a feel-good thing. It's, I don't think it's necessary. As far as the town clerk, I do think that she should be elected, not appointed. I think it's a good system. It keeps checks and balances a little bit better. And I am very much in favor of limiting town meetings and having 2 of them. I think you would have a lot more turnout from a lot more voters and concerned citizens. A lot of times I know I've skipped them, like, oh, I don't have time for all that. I think if it was a little more streamlined, you'd see a lot more people around. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Bill Tyler, Graham Street in Lunenburg. Because of the time frame between the Charter Review Commission...
Would you mind spelling your last name?
I'm sorry.
Would you mind spelling your
Tyler,
last name?
Tyler. Because of the time frame between the Charter Review Commission's final red line draft and the Cemetery Commission's last meeting on March 1st, we have not met as a commission to discuss the changes, although some of us have read them. So I'm not sure whether I can comment on them as a commissioner. I would need some guidance whether I can as a sole commissioner. I wouldn't be speaking as a whole commission, just myself.
You are authorized to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Not by me, but by law.
Thank you for clarification. The Board of Cemetery Commissioners met on February 12th, 2018 with Charter Review member Steve Archambault to discuss the changes we wanted in the Charter. The Mass General Laws, Chapter 114, Section 23, clearly state the powers and duties of the elected commission. The current Charter states this in as many words, with the exception of the word sole. We requested that this be added to the proposed new Charter, and it was. One of my concerns is the language that has been added in the red line version to that section. It is my opinion that it adds conflict to the whole meaning of the section. Whereas in the opening section, it gives the commission sole care and superintendent and management, the red line language following it appears to take it away. I don't feel there is any need for added language, as our powers and duties are clearly spelled out in the current Charter, with the exception of the word sole. Secondly, while the day-to-day care and maintenance is under the supervision of the town manager, there are situations that occur that require the commission to be involved in the day-to-day care, superintendence, and management of the town's 2 cemeteries. While these situations do not occur frequently, I feel that the proposed addition to the powers and duties would hinder our ability to handle these issues when they occur. I'm also concerned as to the reasoning behind these changes, other than trying to diminish the Commission's ability to conduct the operation of Lunenburg cemeteries in a timely and efficient manner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Passios, 56 Whiting Street. I'd like to follow up on Mr. Tyler's comments. Being out in the public, talking with many people, including members of different boards, and again, I'm not here to speak for those boards, but what individuals have told me, and more or less echo exactly what Mr. Tyler just said. These boards are very concerned with the verbiage being added to the end of their paragraphs, which I'd actually like to read because I don't think the public is clearly aware, or at least those who have not seen the red line version up online or a hard copy. The paragraph that has been added to all of these boards, with the exception of the Board of Health, for reasons that the Board of Health defended, and that is the fact that Mass General Law adamantly protects the Board of Health and keeps it separate from town government. So that board has control of their employee and all of its day-to-day operations. Again, I'd like to read the verbiage that was added. Provided, however, that nothing in this section shall be construed to authorize any member of the commissioners, nor a majority of such members, to become involved in the day-to-day administration of the commission. It is the intention of this provision that the commissioners shall act only through the adoption of broad policy guidelines. Again, as the previous speaker mentioned, again, this brings the oversight more to the head of a pin, and this is quoting somebody that I spoke with, in that the checks and balances are being systematically removed and narrowed to the head of a pin. We have these boards and commissions elected by the townspeople. They set policy, and they have nobody under them to administer those policies because they answer to someone else in town government. Those were the basic comments I'd like to make in general for that being added. Also, many of the members that I discussed with this early on made comments that the outreach to boards and commissions was to ask for suggested changes from the boards, but in no case did they feel that this committee reached out to them with changes that they put in that were not asked for. And I understand some of it's time constraint, and I think that it's also important to understand that early on your entire committee promised that if for any reason your time frame and schedule could not be followed, that you would withdraw and wait for next year and not rush this to town meeting. Thank you.
Paula Bertram, 312 Townsend Harbor Road. Just a few comments. First, I don't think that there's any necessity to change to select board. I've served as a woman on the board for 12 years and never found it to be necessary to change that title. Secondly, I believe the town clerk needs to remain elected. I trust that the voters are more than capable of electing a suitable candidate with the correct qualifications, and I trust in the people. I do think that adding 2 meetings is a good idea, and hopefully it will increase attendance. My biggest concern is regarding the language regarding the town manager. I believe the proposed charter greatly expands the authority of the town manager and removes the powers of other elected bodies. As a prior speaker indicated, I think the language regarding a board has the authority to adopt broad policy guidelines is ambiguous. I don't know what that means. And I believe that the language that has been added may alter many boards' current authority and operations. I also am concerned about the language regarding personnel, and it's something that I've long struggled with as a member of the Select Board. I believe that currently boards and commissions and committees deal with their employees on a regular basis. The town manager's interaction with many of those employees is limited. For example, the Conservation Commission, the town manager doesn't attend those meetings. The Sewer Commission, town manager doesn't attend those. At those meetings is when employees are given direction and given work to do, and how they fulfill those duties isn't really under the realm of the town manager. So I believe that elected bodies should have a voice in the personnel evaluation. I don't think it should be exclusive. However, I think they do have a role. Perhaps in partnership with the town manager. Maybe it's a 2-part evaluation, but I think it needs to be considered because they are the ones who deal on a regular basis with their employees. I believe the proposed wording in many of the areas virtually eliminates the ability of a board or a commission to have a voice in the operation that they are elected and responsible to fulfill.
Thank you.
Tom Alonzo, A-L-O-N-Z-O, 284 Lancaster Avenue. So just a couple of points. First, I know a few people have mentioned, and I would probably concur, that having served on 2 charter review committees in the past, that I hope that the speed of the committee's work isn't governed by the fact that you wanted it to get in front of annual town meeting, because I would argue that it's probably better to be more thorough and get the feedback from as many people and boards and bodies in town as possible than it is to be fast in its completion. So if that is, after hearing all the results today or all the comments today, I would say that if you feel that you need to go back, I would encourage that instead of really trying to wordsmith it in the next 6 weeks to get it to town meeting. As far as the proposals themselves, I will go on the record. I will say that I will strongly support the change of the town clerk to appointed, as it is, I believe, and have believed for many years, a very ministerial position that is administrative in function, unlike all the other elected bodies where it is policy making. So I think someone who has skills, it's also the only elected official that we have a salary for, so it's actually, in a way, looked at, I think somebody said it on the board, on the committee I meant, said it's actually like an employee already, and I think it should be treated as such. I think if we were to build a charter from the ground up, it would be, most people would appoint it to begin with, and I think that the position and the powers and duties that that position serves are more geared toward what the other ones. I wouldn't think that you would elect a chief of police. I wouldn't think you'd elect a fire chief or et cetera. So I do support that change. I will say that also that I am against adding a second annual town meeting in the charter. I think that there's certainly an already power by the Board of Selectmen to call a special town meeting, as we have had for many, many years. And we generally have two, one annual that's mandated, because that's mandated by state law. But I don't know that mandating two requires you to have one, which means it incurs a cost even if there's no business to be held. You still have to announce that there's going to be one, even if the sole purpose is for the moderator to open it and close it. And there's no reason to do that, because you can always call a special town meeting. It seems to have worked fine. The argument that I've heard, the reasoning is that it will increase participation. Well, I don't know why the predictability of town meeting would increase participation, because we get very varied participation in annual town meeting, and that's been fixed for forever. So I don't think there's any evidence of that at all. Again, I don't see that it needs to be changed. I don't see the benefit of doing it in any regard, since you can already do it, and we already do it. The appointments, there's one appointment that I did want to bring people's attention to that is changing from the Board of Selectmen completely to the town manager, and that is the town accountant. And historically, at least in our discussions previously over the years, the town accountant was the one financial position that was appointed by the Board of Selectmen only, as an independent body that didn't have to worry about their position of being hired or fired by the person who's, you know, overseeing the books that they need to oversee. So it was really an independent person that only reported as far as hiring and firing. Obviously, they work with the town manager, report to the town manager, but they could not be fired except by the Board of Selectmen. So when the Board of Selectmen, presumably, the idea is that if you ask for a report from the town accountant, you'd get an independent view and not a view of somebody who hired them. I will, without going back too far, I mean, there was a time in town when there was financial misdoings between departments and everything. Didn't really directly relate to this, but it does speak to that, having an independent voice of the Board of Selectmen into the financial department of the town. So I would probably recommend that the town accountant remain solely with the Board of Selectmen. And lastly, about the last thing that most people are talking about is about that added paragraph in many of the elected bodies. I would say, having served on the Board of Selectmen, that has always been a very difficult issue to define. What are the elected bodies' roles in day-to-day? What is day-to-day? This is something that's come up. It's come up today again and will continue to come up. I don't know that the language, I guess my point in this, what's being proposed, I'm not sure that the language that you're adding does what you think it does, which is, according to your notes, clarifies it. I think if you change something from being murky to being cloudy, I'm not sure that that really is a benefit. So I would probably say that I'm going to hand up a suggestion to clarify what you've put in there. But even that being said, I think the whole idea of where that balance is always going to be a difficult one. I don't think you're ever going to be fully able to define that. we certainly can't have two levels of employment, because otherwise that just gets people having their own employees that don't report to anybody except them, and I don't know that that's going to work either. So it really has to be a consolidated effort. Not an easy position either way, but I don't know that this one does what you're looking to do. I will present this phrase that I think might clarify it.
Thank you.
And I think that is it. I do want to, I know the time it takes for these meetings, so I want to thank all of you for your time on those. I know being deliberative is really important, and I really appreciate all the time that you've all spent on boards that you are and the committees that you are already on, and the additional time here. So I look forward to hearing your deliberation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Tim Murphy, 97 Island Road. I would echo what Mr. Alonso said to thank all of you for your service, especially two people that I had to strong arm in that aren't already on the committee. Needed some extra time. I'm very much in favor of having the two meetings. I would like the second meeting to have a specific date so it can be planned around. We had a couple of times where the selectmen are calling me at the last minute, can you be available on such and such a night? I think it needs to be set. I think people need to plan, and not that you're the body, but the selectmen really need to decide what they're going to put on each one of the warrants, because we jam-pack May and then we can't get to everything and the people are tired. I agree the town meeting goes too long. I wouldn't be opposed to having a time set where it would close, and then have the meeting move over to the next night. One of the things that happens, though, is that people just want to talk, including some people in this room. You know, I mean, it's easy to stop the town meeting. You move up and say, move the question. The people vote to move the question, and we can go forward. But instead, people want to talk and talk and talk and on, and it goes sort of like me tonight. I would encourage you to take your time, and although you're all probably tired of this process maybe, and it's been long and it's difficult and it's stressful, I'm not sure we're ready to vote on it. And so as the person who may be managing the meeting, where now you're going to be allowed to have amendments, this could drag on all meeting long, with amendment upon vote, to then to amend, to go back, and before we ever get this done, it would be a very long town meeting. So you might need to step back, spend more time on this, see if you can get more consensus from more people before we take it to town meeting. So that would be my last thought, and I again want to thank all of you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Phyllis Luck, 50 Sunset Lane, L-U-C-K. I have to spell that a lot, actually. I agree with several of the other speakers that I see no reason to change the name of the Board of Selectmen to Select Board. Like Terry said, you know, why? I also believe that the town clerk should remain an elected position. I agree with Mr. Alonso that the town accountant should remain appointed by the BOS. And I also feel that the wording changes inserted in several elected boards without any consultation with those boards does not serve to clarify, but rather further clutties the waters. And I also agree that you should just take a deep breath and come back maybe in the fall or next spring. I don't believe this is ready. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anna Lockwood, L-O-C-K-W-O-O-D, Anna with one N. So I probably won't be able to be as eloquent as previous speakers, but and I do have, but I want to touch a couple things that I think the inserted language regarding duties from the boards and the day-to-day operations, when I read it, and I read it a few times over, I think it became an organizational issue, and I think that's what, you know, the charter review is trying to address. And I think the language sort of had a disconnect between the person doing the day-to-day and the people doing the creating and adopting the policies. And I think that's where, you're kind of lost, and I think that's part of where the response that you're having. So, I would have, as trying to fix the language, because I do understand what you're trying to do, I would have inserted the language in a way that I would say, it is the intention of this provision that commissioners shall act to define and adopt policies and guidelines that shall be govern the day-to-day care and maintenance, and I was using the Parks Commission. So that way, we know that the elected board is the one defining the rules that the people they're executing is going to be following. And I think that's the connection that you're going to create. Because right now it does, the way the language is, it does create two different bodies. They're doing the same thing, they're not connected at all. The other thing that I don't think anyone touched was by not having that the boards have any day-to-day, operation or oversight over their commissions, are we then taking away the ability for those boards to enact a volunteer body to do something, the parks cleanup? And I think that's, because that would be a day-to-day, and therefore, we would be losing that. The language could be easily interpreted that we are not allowed to have that. And, and Lunenburg is largely run by a body of volunteers. So I think that, we got to think about how to connect those two, the policy making and the people doing the day-to-day of maintenance and taking care of everything. The other funny thing, and this is a comment, I didn't expect the select board versus selectmen to be an issue. And I have heard here everyone, I think maybe one person said, they support maintaining it the way it is. I just finished reading Romeo and Juliet for the first time. We don't speak like we did when that book was first published. Language evolves. I know a couple languages, and the language certainly has evolved with my 40 years of being alive. Language evolves, that's all it is. And I don't see the harm of updating the language that's in our charter. And if there is no harm, why not? But it seems like if there's no harm, why should we do it? But the bottom line is language evolves. But I didn't expect that to be an issue. But anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure there was no one else, because I'm not supposed to get up again until everybody else talks. So, there was one thing on the on my proposal for the write-in that I didn't touch on, that I just want to touch on, not to beat a dead horse, but because it was discussed during your first meeting, and it was some discussion about caucus and being, getting one vote and things. And I just want to state that, caucus is kind of one vote, but it's not electing anybody. It's putting somebody on the ballot. So it's not apples and apples at all, that, that because one vote at caucus puts you on the ballot is not the same as one vote in the write-in putting you in an office. I'd just like to say, and I'm totally speaking for myself now, the Sewer Commission's input was deliberated and voted unanimously. I just confirm we were not aware of the business administrator's input at all, so we didn't get to discuss that at all. So I would suggest that what the Sewer Commission's input should stand. I'm very reassured by the other commissions getting up here with this day today, and here I am absolutely speaking on my own behalf. There's other dynamics at process here that are driving the need for this, because I'm not seeing the need for it. I think things are working fine the way the charter is, even for the Sewer Commission. I've been on it 12 years. For the first 10 years, for sure. We've always operated, no other board has, but we've always operated. Our charter did address day-to-day, and it said the day-to-day operation, care, and maintenance of the sanitary sewer system shall be under the supervision of the town manager. It did not preclude the sewer commission from being involved in day-to-day, which is what you're now proposing. And there's a huge difference. There's two huge differences in my mind. One, it's a very different direction for the charter. You're no longer saying what people's responsibilities are. You've now crossed the line and say, this is what you can't do. Should we put in here that, that the town manager can't be involved in policies we set? You know, it's a slippery slope if we start trying to define what people can't do. I mean, let's just stick with what they can do and who has to do what. What we've had for years with the town manager who delegates it, being responsible for supervision of day-to-day, it has worked fine. And it hasn't clouded, muddied this water. We've been fairly involved, quite frankly, in day-to-day, and I think our users have benefited from it. Our commissioners have been very dedicated and focused. We go out with the people, we are present on inspections, and we learn a lot so that we can take it back and make policy. If we're not able to be involved, or can we not go out on an inspection, because that's involved. I think it's a real slippery slope, and until there's a lot more discussion on this point, I don't think any of these changes should be made to the charter for any of the commissions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wanted to ask one question in response or from what the town moderator said. Is it the intention, and it was a little unclear at the beginning, that you would allow amendments at town meeting?
It's not that we allow. Town council gave us an opinion that there is no restriction. Town meeting has the ability to do amendments to a special act charter as opposed to one that was adopted through an elected commission that brought a yes or no item there. So
okay.
That's the difference.
I don't recall that, but there is one part of a slippery slope that I would offer, is that if the entire document is being presented to the town and the town can make amendments, that means they don't have to make amendments to your revisions. They can make amendments to the entire charter. So I would really rethink that and get town council, because that opens up a can of worms that I don't think anybody on this stage and anybody behind me thought that would do. We're going to debate a 22-page document. If you get 200 people and you get 100 people to vote for you on changing election terms and everything, which could possibly happen, I can't believe that's the intent. So I would get clarification of that.
Our understanding is that it would be subject to the limits of what the article writes. So the major terms in the article, as in the warrant, would be the items that could go before it. Now, you could debate whether something's a typographical, grammatical change that effectively says give somebody power, doesn't give somebody power, and whether you could do that shift is a different discussion. Because there were some speakers tonight who made comments on the charter that we didn't discuss, we didn't make any changes or anything else like that, which was good. Everybody should be reading the charter. So, yes, it's similar to the Constitutional Convention that could happen on a national level. When you have a Constitutional Convention, the entire Constitution's up for this debate. So that will be a discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Tim Murphy, again, 97 Island Road. Regarding the previous speaker, I think that would be so far out of the scope of what's going to be on the warrant that I don't think we have to be worried that it would open up that wide an amendment. But I do think that with as many things that are on this charter review, that we could have a lot of amendments, because there's a lot of discussion that maybe still hasn't taken place, and that's why I was suggesting that maybe this committee needs to spend a little more time getting a little bit more input before we're ready to vote at a town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Joe Anderson, 780 West Street. I just have a couple questions. I don't know if it was already talked about. I apologize if it was. If you changed the Board of Selectmen Select Board, do you have to go back and change other documents right after that call out Board of Selectmen, or is that? So if you have a policy that says Board of Selectmen and you change to Select Board, do you have to go back and change the policies that call it the Board of Selectmen?
You wouldn't have to immediately do that.
But eventually you'd have to do that, right?
Yeah, as you would.
And I imagine that's a lot of policies that call out Board of Selectmen. I mean,
I can't tell you how many policies.
Let's just assume it's a pretty good amount. So I think that would be my main concern about changing it to Select Board. I understand the intent of it, and I have 3 daughters, and I like that, trying to make it equal. I know that was the intent of it, and I appreciate that. Another question, I believe it was actually Phyllis who brought up the minimum write-in votes, and that did not make it into the charter. I just want to say, not that we have to have a discussion, I think it was actually a pretty good idea, and that's speaking on a person who won on 9 votes. So, so just FYI, I think it's a good idea. If you have to have a minimum, I think it's 42 to get on the ballot. It's probably not a bad idea to have a minimum of 42 to be an actual elected person. And again, 9 votes. So, and I'm pretty sure 4 of them were the sewer commission. But anyway.
And their spouses.
And their spouses. And me. But I think that's a good idea, and maybe that should be considered. I know you guys don't have a lot of time until town meeting. And then just a couple opinions. I do like keeping the town clerk as elected. I just think that, not that you're trying to take the voice away from the people, I think the perception might be, why are they trying to take the voice away? And I know that that's not the intent of it, but just the perception of it might be that. And I like to keep elected people. I believe it was Paula who said that you can trust the people to nominate someone who's qualified and vote for that person. Just wanted to put my opinion there. And also with the day-to-day operations things, I know a lot of people have been talking about, I believe the sewer commission actually kept that in there. We added to it. We just took the wording that the selectmen had and put it in there as well. So I don't think it's too bad. I do think it needs a little bit more clarity of what day-to-day is, and it could be different with each commission. Obviously, the day-to-day administration of sewer is mostly done by Jack and the DPW, and we have other firms, but it might be different with cemetery. So maybe it doesn't have to be the same on every commission and committee. It could be different what the day-to-day is. Maybe just clarify what day-to-day is on each thing. So that's it. Thank you. Oh, and thank you very much. I watched a lot of your meetings, and I know it's been months and months and months, so thank you very much for all you guys did.
Thank you. Just a point of information, when we talk about the 42 votes, that's tied to the number of people that voted in the last governor's election. So it's a statutory thing. That's what we have to do for the number of signatures to get on the ballot. So that's what this theory was, that would be tied to that. It wouldn't go in as 42, it would tie to that number. So more people vote, the number has to be higher. Or less people vote, the number's lower.
Dave Passios, 56 Whiting Street. Just 2 quick follow-ups from all of the previous speakers. I had mentioned in my specific comments that I strongly support keeping the town clerk's position as an elected position. I just wanted to get my personal feeling on that out there. Also, something that is as difficult to identify as day-to-day operations, which seems to be one of the big bones of contention here. I suggest maybe we take the posture that the planning board did in their deliberations in trying to get their use tables ready for town meeting. And I think Mr. Jeffries knows what I'm about to bring up. But there was 45 minutes spent on trying to identify the size of a flock of chickens. And ultimately, at the end of that discussion, they decided to strike it completely. Thank you.
How you doing? My name's Seth Mayer, 291 Howard Street.
We're going to spelling your last name.
M-A-Y-E-R. Not so as eloquent as the rest of the speakers. Going down the list here, I was taking some notes. Number 1, I would say don't change it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Number 2, same thing.
Sorry, are those specific topics?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Number 1, the handout that I picked up right here.
Oh, okay.
All right, number 1, the change in the name of Board of Selectmen to Select Board. I understand you guys, you're tasked with going over this, looking at reviewing the charter every 10 years. And some might think if you didn't do anything, you weren't giving it your all. And that's not always the case. And the analogy I would give would be vehicle manufacturers. If they have something that works, they can't just stick with that. They have to keep up with the times that are changing, different designs, different styles. But they're trying to sell something and you're not. If it works, it can stay the same. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Hannah Lockwood, 91 Main Street. Sorry, I forgot to mention one thing, which was my intention. Should have taken better notes. One thing about the day-to-day operations, I do know that that's currently listed on the charter. It's just the language you guys added went a little more in depth of what it was. But one thing that concerns me is how well can we run the town? We are a very lean town. We count a lot on our volunteers. But, you know, I also think of, you know, and I hate to use Jack's name without his permission, you know, he has to do so much for so many different boards. So, you know, I personally don't want a board or a commissioner to, well, let me put it a different way. I don't want vendors to think that they should be calling commissioners. You know, power corrupt people both ways, not just elected, but people that also serve and get paid to do their day-to-day. So I think that we need to create a barrier between those two things. We need to create a barrier where, you know, there is a check and balances, but there is a balance on the elected boards as well. We want to make sure that's the case. And we also want to make sure that we are making, you know, we're asking our few employees, the ones that we have and that do so much, you know, we are creating a structure of our government that they can actually, you know, serve. I mean, if we have, you know, one person having to attend who we, you know, as an employee, has to attend, you know, 10 different meetings every month. We have, I think I counted, we have like 17 different boards and commissions, 19. I mean, between everything, I think we have over 30, you know, bodies. And if we're having an employee having to report to that, to, you know, follow up on, it's just a nightmare. It just wouldn't work. So I think, you know, the day-to-day is already there. I do think there has to be a little bit of a balance of power on both sides. I don't think, you know, elected officials should go unchecked. I'm sorry, I don't. You know, I mean, you are elected officials, so I'm sorry for saying this, but, you know, I do trust our employees because their livelihood comes from their paycheck. So they have a vested interest on doing a good job. You know, elected officials, you know, get elected, resign, gets appointed. There is some, you know, I don't know. I like the idea of someone doing the job that they get paid for, and if they don't do a good job, they're gonna lose their job. So there's a value to that. There's a value of creating, you know, a structure that the employees can work, but it needs to be a check balance on both sides. I don't think elected officials should go unchecked at all. So, sorry. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, I will declare the public comment period end at 8:47. So, one of the items that has been brought up is whether we continue to deliberate now to go to town meeting. I would suggest that we start deliberating, see where we are after we get through the minor and the major items, and then make a decision at that point of whether we are comfortable presenting that to the town meeting. But I'd like to ask for opinions on that process.
You know, I'll start, I guess, Mr. Chair. I think I stated several times in this committee that I would not support us having a goal trying to reach town meeting in May. I think that the work of this body should continue until we're done. And one of the things that we discussed very early on was the need to do a lot of outreach on the back end of this, to be able to reach back and forth with a lot of committees. And I think that, you know, I think on January 10th at our meeting then, I think it was pretty clear that we were probably out of sight of town meeting. And I think that I support us prolonging this process to be longer. If I may also make one comment about, in reference to the name change of the Board of Selectmen, because, you know, I've been in the middle.
Before you do that, let's just stay on the topic of continuing, because you're now getting into deliberation of the subjects, which we're allowed to deliberate, but I want to keep some format.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I've been a proponent all along of working with time being of the essence. However, You can't predict the weather, and the weather did get in our way and interfered with our public outreach process, and I think that's something we need to recognize. I personally am not comfortable that we can complete our deliberations in time for the upcoming town meeting. I think we need to take the time to do it right. I think we've heard a lot this evening that we need to reflect on and discuss, and I'd like to take the time to do that.
And I would concur, Mr. Chairman, particularly since there have been some, at least one proposal tonight that I think, we had started to have a discussion about, but with further clarification, I think it's worth us revisiting that issue, and I think it would take some thoughtful time to revisit that issue. So I would concur that taking more time and getting it right would be the right approach.
Okay, I'll say that one thing I thought of while we were doing this is I would want the final draft completely final well before town meeting. I wouldn't want to have, if somebody wants to really sit and read it, I think it should be available in its completely final draft, no questions asked, well before town meeting. I don't think we can do that.
And my goal was, it was either going to be done tonight or it wasn't going to go forward. I don't believe we're going to be ready to get it done tonight. I think there's a lot of subject matters that were brought up that I have various opinions on, and I think before I want to react to any of the comments, I want to get my thoughts together and think about, well, what does that really mean? And then I also want to encourage any of the public that made comments. I've used the Sewer Commission as an example, that they called a special meeting because they had the time to do it, and everybody was available, which was really unusual to be able to do that quickly. And they worked to try to get as good a product as they could. Well, the other commissioners other boards haven't had that. We've had people who are out of town, other things like that. So I think that I may still have certain opinions on some of these topics. I don't think that we're ready to publish this on the website tomorrow, which would give people the time to get there. I do think that we need to then, I'm going to still let other people make comments too. We would set up the schedule to start, all right, now our next meeting, let's do the feedback on the major items. Town clerk probably is going to be, you're either here or you're here. That may or may not be moving based on some of the testimony. The other items about the commissions, I've been moved based on the reaction initially before we got tonight that some of the language needs to be taken out. I'm not prepared to define day to day because this is the charter, this is not the bylaws. We don't want to get down in that detail because we define day to day today, and tomorrow it's going to be different, and we've stuck ourselves too much. The other thing is, I'm okay with a little messy government. You've got town government, you've got employees, you've got managers. That's what government is. It's messy because it changes and people are going to be at different boards. So we have to allow for a certain amount of that messiness. We're trying to get the guidelines for what we're going to do. I'd like to talk to previous charter commissions because I was on the first one that didn't get adopted way back in the 80s. And what's changed since then is government's changed, HR laws changed, other things like that. So we have evolved. There is work to be done, but our proposed solution is going to be a solution, or I like the comment that we've gone from murky to cloudy. Okay, we're all going to get, our cataracts taken out, we're going to have better eyes. Well, no, that's not going to be the case right away. And so we need to know consciously to say, here are the facts, okay, let's get those out of the way. Here are the policy decisions. Let's get to the policy decision. There's a lot of stuff in here that really is housekeeping that should be updated. The fact is it still says 24 hours for public notice. Well, you know that its state law says 48, so this doesn't apply. So there's some things that we're operating with the process that we're able to deal with it. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, and I definitely want to wait because there's unintended consequences that I think happen with, for example, I think today I reached out to you to say, does Mass General Law supersede the charter? And it's clear that it's the other way around. So inserting that language into all of the departments actually has an unintended consequence that I wasn't aware of. The other is that I don't know if calling like the second town meeting special change, because again, part of the reason for having a second town meeting was to not have the burden on the voter to have to get 100 signatures to get on the warrant. So if you call it the special town, the fall special town meeting, does that keep that? So, like there's things that informationally, I just want more information on before hitting an unintended consequence.
And just for point of reference for the public, that since this is a special act of the legislature, it effectively is what they call small g, small l general laws. So it does, if there's something in here that the legislature adopts, it does say whatever is somewhere else in the law doesn't apply anymore if this is different. So this really becomes a charter/law. So when we make these changes, we really need to know that we're making these changes, and it's not, if it doesn't say anything, then the general law still applies. But if we're specifically saying we're going to do it this way, then it's got to be done that way, not the way the general law is. So you have to constantly read the things together.
Mr. Chairman, I am in favor of us doing more work, and even if that means we miss town meeting, I support that. But I think we need to be specific about the kind of work we need to do. I don't know that any of us want to spend hours recovering conversations we've already had. I think there's pieces of data. I'll give you two for instances. I think that when we talk about the issue that seems to have gotten a lot of attention tonight, and rightfully so, of the broad policy guidelines versus day-to-day, I think that's something that needs to be workshopped with the town managers and the commissions that have specifics, and come up with some wording, not to try to define every possibility, but define wording that it's almost like that court case on pornography. You'll know it when you see it, where people get more comfortable with what we mean by day-to-day and what we mean by policy setting. And it also gets to the reality of someone like the DPW director who does work for 7 committees, all right? So I think there's some specific sub-work that needs to be done. Another one, I think there are certain binary decisions, Board of Selectmen versus Select Board. I'm not sure us debating any longer is going to solve that. Maybe we pick one, we put it on whatever town meeting we go to, and we live with what the citizens say. But I would suggest that we, another item might be the elected versus appointed. I think that's a binary one. But I think we need to have 2 positions. We need somebody to articulate very well why someone might consider elected, and we might articulate very well why someone would consider appointed. So that we're actually doing specific work, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make here.
And I would add in on that the various appointed positions, as was brought in about the town accountant, just to go back and verify that which ones where we want it to be. In some of the positions have evolved over time as each charter has come through. So I think it'd be good for us to actually get prior charters, the first one, the second one, and then this one.
One example I neglected to mention that I think we could do some real good work on is the intent of the 2 meetings a year was to try to increase participation at both of them. And I think that the sub-work there might include the moderator and the Board of Selectmen, who put a majority of the agenda together, so that we could be more specific about how to split that so that it becomes 2, if it's 2 reasonable meetings that with content that can be, planned for.
And some of the unintended consequences.
Right, yeah, I think the issues of 2/3 versus majority, the issues of 100 versus 200, what impact that has on the terminology.
And I think also just clarifying that special town meetings can still occur, because that's the...
And if we're looking at, setting things that should be examined, I know that we had brought up and decided not to act on the idea of some number required for a no ballot write-in is maybe something we would like to revisit.
And then, going back to the library, we need to talk about that more, and I actually think that would be a benefit of the town manager and the library director and the library trustees, just to have some discussions to go on that part too. We're effectively creating our tasks to look at what the other things to do. I'm not saying we're not going to cover the other things, especially since it's 9 o'clock, and our goal was pretty successfully to end at 8:30 every single meeting. So we knew this one was going to be longer. So going back, I think the other thing would be just generally the town manager's duties. Somebody once asked me when this first started coming out was, okay, so everything you're going to give to the town manager, you're now going to increase the salary because you're increasing the work? Well, that's not the intent. So the intent was to try to have some more efficiency. Well, if all of a sudden we try to get more efficiency, but we ended up over here, well, that's not where we want to be. So we need to come back and have further discussions on that. And that may be the Board of Selectmen with a workshop with the town manager to see, she's been here just over a year now. Let's see what she's heard, what she's seen, and other things like that. Oh.
I just remember the issue about town accountant being appointed by the board or appointed by the town manager. I think that's very important because now I'm hearing that there's a check and balance now involved.
And Mr. Chair, I feel like it's not a moment of failure because, like somebody mentioned, and like I said in my minority report, we have a charter. We function under it, and things function as good as they can in government. So that it's not as if this is a moment of failure. We already have something that governs us, and even if we didn't change it at all, it continues to provide the structure that we currently have.
I second that, and I would suggest that as we continue our work, we strongly consider, can the charter as written meet our desired goals without any changes? If there are changes needed, they should be for a good reason, and we should be able to articulate that and agree as a committee, as well as articulate it to the town when we do bring it before them.
As they talk about in job search world, you need to be able to explain each issue in the 90 seconds that you're in an elevator with somebody. I don't think I can do it on all the articles. Some of them I could, but not all of them. I echoing what Katie just said, we've actually had a lot of people read the charter for the first time, including a lot of elected officials. Or again, it's like, well, it says that. So for instance, the finding out that if you don't have a unanimous vote in any committee, you are supposed to record who's voting yes and who's voting no. Okay? If you have rules of how you conduct your meeting, you're supposed to record those and give them to the town clerk. So for instance, our rule that we were going to only vote by a supermajority, we're supposed to give that to the town clerk so that people see how we operate. We actually haven't given that other than it's in our minutes, so we can say it was given to the town clerk. Not entirely sure where we would actually have that and make it accessible. Maybe with a new town website that's coming within the next month, we'll be able to have some of this information. So I would accept a motion to not present to town meeting at the May town meeting.
I would make a motion not to accept the charter, the draft charter as we've proposed.
I can second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So we can record it as unanimous. And so our regular meeting schedule process was the second and fourth Wednesday of the month. So our next meeting then would be...
Actually, Mr. Chair, I don't know if we want to consider changing the time or date in order to make it more accessible to the public. I don't know if it makes sense to have it actually broadcast as we do it.
Okay, we did try to do that, and then it turns out the nights we met were the nights that the zoning board of appeals, so.
That's just my sense. I don't know if there's
I think
consensus on
that's
that.
great. So theoretically, we should be meeting next Wednesday, the 11th.
That goes school committee schedule, I think was originally brought up, then you match the school committee,
And they've got some things going on.
which limits participation. in
Okay, we will do a doodle poll to get.
We'll meet about meetings.
We'll meet about meetings, right. But we'll have to post that 48 hours in advance.
Okay.
In accordance with state law, not the town charter. So we will be scheduling, we'll figure out when it's convenient for people and try to get it televised so people can actually watch it too.
Was there a reason we couldn't do Thursdays? Because if it's off Thursday from the finance committee,
I'm in a rehearsal every Thursday.
okay, that's why, okay.
We will work on this.
Okay.
So we said we're not going to meet next Wednesday?
No, because the school committee has events going on. So we'll get out some, we'll talk with the Public Access Committee to find out when things are available and try to figure out how we can get things televised at the time. With that, we'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 9:05. Thank you all for coming.